My mom demanded that I let her husband of 6 months walk me down the aisle instead of my biological dad, or she threatened not to come to my wedding at all. So I told her, okay. Goodbye. And went ahead with my wedding. But an hour before it was about to end, she showed up sheepishly, demanding we restart everything because she's in big trouble. Hi y'all. So I got into a terrible fight with my mom a couple of days back on the day of my wedding, or rather after everything was done with. It was completely her fault, but recently I spoke to my grandma and intentionally created even more trouble for her. And that's why I decided to come to Reddit to ask if what I did was justified or not. I'm 24 female and have been with my partner, 24 male, for the past 10 years. We started dating in high school and he's the love of my life. So this wedding was a huge deal for me. We got engaged last year and have been planning this for months because we wanted it to be an event that people would remember. Both he and I had even saved up a ton of money to finance this, and my mom didn't care a bit about any of that. My parents are divorced. They ended their marriage when I was 6 years old and had been co-parenting me after that. They never got along, and honestly I can't imagine how they even made their marriage last for as long as they did, since they had been married for almost 3 years when I was born, and then they continued to stay together for 6 more years before they finally parted ways. Most kids are quite unhappy when their parents tell them that they're going to get divorced, but when they explained to me what was going on I was thrilled. For me it meant that they were not going to be fighting every day anymore, and if they were happy it would mean that I would finally have a shot at being happy as well. So as a kid I was quite content with their decision, and they had shared custody of me, so I would spend half the month at my dad's place and the other half at my mom's. Unfortunately though, I had celebrated a bit too early because I didn't realize that even in a co-parenting arrangement, they would have to at least speak to each other and be on the same page about me, and they would struggle even with that. They were always bad-mouthing each other whenever they were around me, and I would always feel like I was caught in the middle. My parents believed that even after the divorce, the other was bent on making life difficult for them. And I tried to be understanding as a kid, but by the time I reached middle school, I had had enough. So I just snapped while I was staying with my dad. And once again, he had had some fight with my mother about me because she had wanted to change the timings when she was going to take me back, since she had some event coming up and my dad was not fine with it. I had started to feel like a burden to both of them by then, so I decided to try and make a run for it. I was just 12 years old at the time, and after I heard my dad fighting on the phone with my mother and then inevitably he started talking crap about her in my presence, I went back to my room and in the middle of the night I packed a few of my things and I left. I still remember that night because I don't think I have ever done anything that stupid after that, since I literally didn't have a plan at all and I thought I was just going to wing it. I remember going to the bus station that night, but since there was just one creepy guy there, I walked back to a park near my house and thought that I would go back to the bus station in the morning as soon as I woke up. Luckily I fell asleep at the park and nothing happened to me. By the next morning my dad had realized that I was missing and informed the cops, and I was brought back home safe and sound. Obviously, once my parents realized that I had tried to run away from home, they confronted me about what I was going through, and I told them that they had made me feel like a burden because of how they constantly kept fighting because of me, and that was when they promised that they would try to be kinder to each other for my sake. Since they had never expected me to take such an extreme step because of their behavior. After that incident, my dad stayed true to his word, and even when he would fight with my mother, he wouldn't say anything to me about it, so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. But my mother would occasionally forget and end up ranting about my dad to me. It made things a bit difficult for me because honestly, I love both my parents and I don't think that they were the villains. I just think that they found it impossible to get along with each other, and that was what made their job of parenting me so hard. It's obviously not easy to raise a kid together when you hate each other, but at least my dad tried his best. My mom, well, let's just say that she didn't take her word as seriously as my father did, and so eventually, I started growing closer to my dad instead. I would still spend time with her when I would go over to her place when it was her turn to have me, and we would have a nice time together. So it's not like I loved her any less, but I just felt more connected to my dad. And after I grew up and left for college, it was my dad who stayed in touch with me more as compared to my mother. So right now I would obviously say that I do prefer my dad over my mom. However, I have still always treated them both with the same kind of love and respect. But what happened recently was just way too entitled for me to handle, which is why I ended up lashing out at her. My parents dated other people as well after their divorce, and my dad decided to get married again about 4 years ago. He had been dating my stepmom for almost 3 years by then, and they were quite serious, so it made sense for him to get married again, since before that he had only had a couple of relationships that led nowhere. My mother had a slightly different approach. She would only have flings and refuse to commit to anyone after the divorce, even if the other guy was interested. I'm not judging her. That's her choice and I respect that. But then she randomly called me a couple of months back, maybe 6 months ago, and told me that she had been seeing a guy for a few months and the two of them had decided to get married, so she wanted me to be there at the wedding. It was all very sudden and rushed and I had no idea what was going on, but she told me that she was just sure of this guy and he seemed to be sure of her too. Besides, she had fun for many years, but now she wanted somebody to be there for her. Her husband, James, fake name, had only been with my mom for about 4 months when they got married, and the two of them seemed to be in love with each other. But I was very skeptical of their relationship. For starters, he was much younger than her, almost by a decade. And obviously there was also the fact that they had known each other for a very little time. It was he who had suggested that they get married, and my mother had constantly been talking about it at the wedding. But I don't think she realized that it was not the thing that she thought it was, because it only made the situation seem even more fishy. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed me off and told me that she was sure of this decision, so I didn't pursue it further since I didn't want to come off as judgmental. And for what it's worth, he actually seemed pretty into her. So I attended the wedding along with a couple of her close friends and a few relatives, and I even wished them the best. When I told my father about all of this, even he was quite surprised that she had gotten married to somebody who she had barely known for a few months. But by then, it was already done. And after that, I got too busy with planning my own wedding to care about what was going on with my mom and James, since they seemed happy enough. For the past 6 months, they have been married, and I have rarely seen her since she spends all her time traveling with him. She did not even attend my bridal shower, but I didn't have any complaints. However, the night before my wedding, when we were all at the hotel, she knocked on my door and told me that she had something very important to discuss with me. So I let her in, and that was when she chose to tell me that she had overheard me talking to my dad about walking me down the aisle and stuff. And even at the rehearsal dinner, she had thought that I would ask James to do it, but I hadn't, even though I had already asked her. I was having both my parents walk me down the aisle because I thought that would be more suited to my family dynamics, and I didn't want my mom to feel left out, but I didn't know what she was even talking about by referring to James. I was honestly baffled why she would even think that because I had known James for a couple of months and as long as my dad was alive, I was not going to pick some random guy to walk me down the aisle on my wedding day. To me, James was not my stepdad but just my mom's husband, and I made it very clear to her. I told her that I had no intention of asking James at any point, and if she had believed that I was going to do so, then she had clearly been mistaken. I had never even indicated or hinted that I would ask him, so I had no idea why she had suddenly started believing something like this. It was simply ridiculous. And to make matters worse, when she realized that I was serious and I was actually going to have my biological father walk me down the aisle instead of her husband, she started throwing a tantrum in my room and told me that if that was the case, then she and James would not be attending at all. Because apparently, she had believed that I was closer to her, and by extension, James would be the one to walk me down the aisle along with her. Apparently, another reason she had expected me to ask James and not my dad was that she believed that she and her father walking me down the aisle would send the wrong message, and it might also make James feel a bit insecure. So she kept throwing her tantrum, and I didn't have time for that, especially not on the night before my wedding because I needed my sleep.